Welcome to the show. My name is Charlton with Big C. This is Charlton and Big C Sports coming to you worldwide on the Big C Sports Network, on the number one network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the number one sports show in the universe, according to Big C. And them good old boys down south, I want to say bienvenidos to all of our listeners in Latin America, also across the pond in London, England, as well as Paris, France, of course. You good old boys in Canada, we love you in Africa, the Big C tribe. But there's no one we love more than the good old boys down south in the land of the free and the home of the brave on a beautiful August the 20th, 2019. Grondo Deportes, Big C. How's it going for you good old boys down south?
Charlton's starting to get a little antsy down here. I think I got an itch or a rash or something like that, because football is only 2 days away now.
Yeah, well, be careful when you have itches, and especially if it turns into a rash. It might be more than waiting for college football, Big C. I do want to say it's all fair in the sports universe. Football is just like getting that new anything that's new, or like Christmas. You can't wait to open your present, especially if you had never opened it before. I'm just so happy that so many people have a different frame of mind. You know, politics can go either way. People are happy or sad. And then relationships can go either way. People are happy or sad. But there's something about football that makes things a lot better. I want to say today's show is sponsored by your Northern California Cadillac dealers, home of the all-new Cadillac Escalade, the standard of the world. When you go by and test drive yours, tell them Charlton and Big C sent you. So I just know that scratching and itching, you know, sometimes if a dog is scratching and itching, it may have fleas, but why do people bring them to the home, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, you know, he's man's best friend, Charlton. He does so many things for you. He'll fetch the paper. He'll bring you slippers. He'll let you know that you got an unwanted neighbor at the door, Charlton. But, you know, you just need the comfort. I guess you got to find some good bug spray to eliminate them.
Yeah, it's funny. Would you imagine, okay, I mean, California, everything goes. And I understand that because I like dogs too. But if somebody came to your house and they're scratching and they're sniffing themselves, would you really want them to sit at the dinner table? Probably not. So why is it when you're at a grocery store, some good old girl looking like Desperate Housewives walks in with a dog, and she says, oh, he's well trained, and she's giving, some restaurants give out samples. This woman's giving samples to her dog. Big C, that don't make any sense. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, if he has that collar on saying a service animal, you can't deny his entry into a store. But you know, any place that's patronizing with some house hound, I really don't want to go in there and eat and deal with that, you know, the produce in that situation.
Yeah, he did not have the service collar on. It was just a good old girl thinking that she was all hooty-tooty. But it's all fair in love and war. I know we talked about some things yesterday, and we were all happy about the best teams in college football, doing top 32 teams in college football, and I want to make sure that I deal with that. But I'm also going to say, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but I tend to do that on a daily basis, so this won't hurt anybody. I was driving through a major city in Northern California, and I tried to do what you talk about doing, giving out food to people, because we want to help people who are going through issues. And but for the grace of God, there go I. We've heard that story from the church. So I have these excess amounts of Girl Scout cookies. And I know they're excessive because I ate one box in one day, Big C. I say, that's not reasonable. And someone said, so why'd you eat the whole box? Because I have an addiction to Girl Scout cookies, Big C. It's like asking someone, why do they gamble if they're addicted to gambling? So I tried to do my favorite thing, which is help other people. I roll down the window. There are these, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's three Caucasian people that looked homeless. So I rolled down the window, because it's hot in California, and I handed them some Girl Scout cookies for free, right? You know, all three of them told me no, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, I experience that on a regular basis. I've been doling out and trying to dole out, you know, items to people that I know that are homeless on a regular basis. I always keep an extra bag or two in a vehicle that I'm driving around.
Yeah.
But one of the things that they will tell you is no. And it's gotten to that point now, you know, they really don't want the food, they want the money.
Yeah.
Because they would prefer to eat out of a trash receptacle than what they would take good food from a person, because that's not going to take care of the need that they're trying to satisfy.
Yeah.
They're trying to get something to satisfy their nerves or their mental anguish that they're going through, Charlton, whether it's alcohol or an illegal substance.
Yeah.
So I empathize with all the people that are on the street, Charlton. It's a very unfortunate thing that we have here in America, that there's too many people that live on the street and that are homeless. Is never addressed by our administration. We're constantly hearing about the great unemployment numbers and the number of people who are no longer on unemployment.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that those people who are giving out those numbers ever drive down some of the back streets and even some of the main streets of America to see the destitute people that are out there that are living on cardboard and boxes and tents underneath bridges and expressways, Charlton. So our media brethren out there that are broadcasting the news never show this side of America.
No.
To show the destitute that we have in this country. But those people are constantly turning down food because they want some other substance that they're addicted to, Charlton.
Yeah, I remember there was a movie with the great Eddie Murphy. I think it was called Trading Places. And it showed just what society is going through today. Imagine POTUS driving around in the Cadillac that he drives around in. And I think one of the guys was Mortimer, and I can't remember the other guy's name, but I do remember with Eddie Murphy, they had a tryst of fate, and they both ended up opposite of how they started. I still want to give out hotline numbers and food, even though I don't give out money, because you never know if someone's going to do something nefarious to you, hit you over the head for it. You never know. But if you have any type of issues, or if you know of somebody who's going through issues, you can dial 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-8255. A lot of kids are back in school now. And the new way of communication, Big C, is through texting. They can text 838-255. Again, 838-255. And I know there's help out there for people, even though sometimes the people you try to help, sometimes they don't want it. I want to touch on finishing up what we did yesterday, counting down our top football teams of all time. Big C's thoughts. Doesn't mean that we're right or wrong. It's like an opinion, and everybody can have one. I want to finish up at a number 49. We're going to add a couple more teams. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish. From 1966, the Irish played one of the most famous games in history in the game of the century against Michigan State that ended in a 10-10 tie. Notre Dame boasted the 41st best defense ever, giving up just 38 points. And that was all season, including 6 shutouts and a season-ending 51-0 win over USC. And there's a lot of good old boys are still protesting. They thought they at least scored a touchdown in that game. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, this was hailed as the game of the century, Notre Dame and Michigan State back in Ann Arbor. Just a wonderful, wonderful day in college football, Charlton. So many All-Americans in that game. The great Bubba Smith was a part of the Michigan State team at that time. College football didn't get the notoriety on television as it did today, but this was one of those nationally televised games, Charlton, that held the nation captive in black and white.
Yeah, I'm telling you, black and white TV. I still have one that works. And you can't hear it, but it still shows a picture. It's kind of fuzzy, but that technology, it's a Zenith. I don't know if Zenith still makes TVs, Big C, but that good old boy, it still plugs in and it still turns on, but I don't know if they're still in business. I want to go number 48 team, 1994. By this point of his career, Joe Paterno had several undefeated teams go unrecognized. 1968, 1969, and 1973, when you think about how great Penn State has been over the years. But none was more unjustly kept away from the national championship than this team, which had the number 4 offense in the history of the sport. They averaged 48 points a game, and Kenyatta Carter and Kerry Collins finished 2nd and 4th, respectively, in the Heisman Trophy voting. They finished the season. Penn State finished ranked number 1 and 2 in the country, depending on what poll, Big C, your thoughts?
Well, I mean, that was a devastating team that Penn State had at that time, and Joe Paterno often was left off the number 1 slot when it came to voting for national championships, Charlton. But that team, as you stated, they had an offense that basically averaged 48 points a game at that time, the highest scoring team in the country, and could not even get the nod to win the number 1 team as the national champion. They ended up number 2 in the polls, Charlton.
Yeah.
Kenyatta Carter went number 1 overall in the draft to the Bengals. Kerry Collins ended up taking the New York Giants to a Super Bowl. He had been drafted by Carolina prior to going to New York, Charlton. But just a great team that Joe Paterno put together, and always was the bridesmaid.
Yeah, and you think about some great teams. Notre Dame, whether it's 1966 or the 1994 Penn State team. I'm going to go and jump to 29. The 1977 Notre Dame football, and there's something about touchdown Jesus, but it's a trend throughout college football history, as we saw the Parseghian era play with the 1966 title game. Notre Dame gets the benefit of the doubt in 1977. Alabama, Arkansas, Texas, Penn State, and Kentucky, they all finished with one loss. It was Notre Dame. They beat undefeated Texas in the Cotton Bowl, and they were the lone national championship team for that year. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, you think about that team, Charlton, and that game, was a mirror of the career of Joe Montana, who was the quarterback of that team when they defeated Texas.
Yeah.
But as you talk about it, all those teams had one loss, and Notre Dame, because of his popularity, and even at that time, Notre Dame spent more time on television than any team in college football, because even back in those days, they had an agreement with NBC Television to broadcast all their games on Saturday.
Yeah.
So Notre Dame had that national recognition where the rest of the country did not get a chance to see all those other teams, Charlton, and became the de facto national champion.
Yeah, and things haven't really changed much, Big C. I want to jump to 28. Yale University, 1905. The 1905 Yale University Bulldogs, with perfect terms of as far as winning, losing, that's no TV. That's the era of no TV. But when you think about winning and losing, they shut out 9 of their 10 opponents. 9 of 10. With only Princeton managing to score 4 points against them, they finished 10-0, and they claimed the national title. I don't care what sport you're in. I don't care what school you are. If you shut out 9 of 10, you are the undisputed national champion. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, everybody gets caught up, Charlton, in the modern-day game that we see on television weekly about football. But you have to think about the dominance of the East Coast in the early era of college football. We've talked about the great Army and Navy teams that were in the 40s, Charlton, how they had back-to-back national championships and back-to-back Heisman Trophy winners. And the Yale Bulldogs, you think about that. I mean, that's a phenomenal number that you just spoke about,
It's
Charlton.
amazing.
You shut out 9 of 10 opponents, and then the one opponent that scored only got 2 safeties off of you.
Yep.
Your defense pitched a shutout for an entire season. That had to be the greatest college defense of all time, not giving up any touchdowns, Charlton, or field goals.
Yeah, they say if you're smart, you can't play a lot of sports, but you can. Number 27, Ohio State, 1954. After three straight losses opening the season, the Buckeyes' coaching career of Woody Hayes was lifted. Ohio State, they won a national title in 1954 with a 10-0 record. And you think about Woody Hayes, he started his first 3 seasons, he had 3 losses. 1954, they went 10-0, capped off by a 21-7 win over their rival Michigan, and a 20-7 win over USC in the Rose Bowl, and Ohio State went on to win the national championship with a perfect 10-0 record, Big C, by the great Woody Hayes. Your thoughts?
Well, you think about what the dominance that Woody Hayes exuded at Ohio State, Charlton.
Yeah.
I mean, he was the godfather of the Big Ten. He and Bo Schembechler at Michigan had such a great rivalry, which was great for college football. But he established the dominance of Ohio State in the Midwest. You think about how that program has still succeeded after he's been long gone, Charlton. Even last year, they were 13-1 on the season. The legacy of Woody Hayes will live on, but he had such a dominant program at Ohio State. Multiple All-Americans and multiple championships, Charlton.
Very much so, Big C. And this is about Woody Hayes. It's amazing what he did with so many great players. 26 on the list. University of Washington Huskies, 1991 season. The great Donnie James knew how to coach teams. That team stands out as one of the biggest surprises in the entire list, especially given the lack of recent teams among the best teams on the list. The Huskies, they shared the 1991 national title with the University of Miami, and they were undoubtedly one of the best teams in the country. If you think about what the Huskies did from the great Northwest, putting Washington on the map, the same way Chris Peters is doing, they were a dominant team, Big C. They beat 3 of the top 10 teams on the way to an undefeated season. They beat number 9 Nebraska at the time. That game was in Lincoln. They beat Cal, and they were ranked number 7 at the time. And then they beat number 4 ranked Michigan in the Rose Bowl. I remember the game back in Lincoln, Nebraska, that they beat Nebraska because they were down. I think they were down by the score of 36-14 at one point, and they came back and won that game against Nebraska. I think it was 27-14. They came back and won 36-27, something along that nature. Give me your thoughts on that dominant team, Big C.
Well, Don James had put together many great teams up in the Northwest. I think the first one that he really put on the map would have been in 1978, Charlton, when he had the great Warren Moon playing quarterback for him, and he went down and won the Rose Bowl down in Pasadena. But that team, Charlton, that won the national championship, you talk about a nasty defense that he had. It was led by Steve Edmonds, probably the most dominant defensive tackle in college football of that day, Charlton. But Don James was able to recruit and bring in players up to the Seattle area, and they led the nation with one of the top teams at a co-national championship.
And half of their roster was actually from California. They had the great Beano Bryant, and then Napoleon Kaufman came there. Mark Brunell was out of California. Billy Joe Herbert's out of Puyallup, Washington. And that team, Chico Fraley, they had a lot of great players. And most of their starters were from California, and that's why they won up in the Great Northwest. Number 25, the Georgia Bulldogs. 1946, this Bulldog team finished undefeated, but they were denied a title behind number 2. And you think about it, Notre Dame and Army, who played to a 0-0 tie, and which many said was the best matchup ever. Georgia finished 3rd in the country that season, but that was a team that many people in the South said was definitely the better team. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, that was another one of those situations. You think about the long suffering of the Georgia Bulldog fans, they always saying they get jobbed. Even last year in the college football playoff, they say they got overlooked. But you look at that Georgia team, Charlton, you go undefeated. And I guess this is the advancement of technology that, you get the voter polls from all over and television that gets to see things. But when you have an undefeated team, but also you got to realize that Army won the national championship that year, Charlton, with an undefeated team also.
And so Georgia and Notre Dame, the good old boys, they get to play this year. It's down in Georgia, this game. They played a couple years ago at Notre Dame. So I'm sure you'll hear this story come up by many of the programs that are going to be broadcasting that game, but we'll see if they get revenge or not. Number 24, Florida. The Gators, 2008, with Tim Tebow at quarterback. Urban Meyer, his second national championship at Florida. Tim Tebow, he was the story of that team. But Florida's defense deserves a lot of credit for the national championship game. Florida held Oklahoma's offense to just 14 points, and Tim Tebow finished 3rd in the Heisman Trophy voting. I still say that NCAA should have had USC that beat Penn State in the Rose Bowl that year, and Florida, they were the 2 best teams, but it didn't happen. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Urban Meyer built a legacy down there in the swamp, Charlton. He came in after Steve Spurrier had been down there and created dominance in Gainesville. But Tim Tebow was the darling of college football in that era. And early in that season, Charlton, they lost a game to Mississippi State. And Tim Tebow vowed that we will not lose another game the rest of the season. And he was true to his word, Charlton. He helped lead the Florida Gators to the national championship, Charlton. And they just dominated the rest of the way of the season.
Well, Florida's always had good athletes. They're always one of the top programs. Even if they don't have the record, they have tremendous athletes. The number 23 on our list, Purdue, 1943, the best team in Purdue history. The Boilermakers went 9-0 a year after finishing 1-8. But they finished the season as a 3rd-ranked team in the country. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, there's so many great football teams, Charlton, that played in the 40s. And I hate that the broadcasters now on television never recognize these great programs.
They don't know.
And some of those programs, Charlton, that's what the history of their sports department is about, those teams that played in the 40s and 50s. And you think about Purdue making such a dramatic change in the season, going from 1-8 to 9-0 and having a perfect season in that era. The Boilermakers' greatest season ever. And they've gone on. They haven't had the success in late years, Charlton, but they can always sit back and reminisce on that undefeated season.
And speaking about a team that really wants to have another undefeated season, started this year with JT Daniels head coach. Actually, he's the starting quarterback, second year out of Mater Dei. Number 22 on the list, The 1978 USC Trojans, that team went 12-1, and they ended up ranked number 2 in the polls. They did it behind the number 43 defense of all time, along with tailback Charles White, who finished 4th in the Heisman Trophy voting. But think about it. 1979, the end of USC beat 3 of the top 7 teams in the country, including Michigan and Notre Dame. But that Charles White, Marcus Allen used to block for Charles White. Marcus Allen went on to NFL greatness. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, both of those guys, Charlton, eventually won the Heisman Trophy at USC, but that was tailback university at the time with USC, and every year you could count on Coach John Robinson putting together a dominant offensive performance, Charlton, and that was one of those teams. They had an early season loss that knocked them out of contention for the national championship, but Charles White did go on to win the Heisman Trophy that year, Charlton.
Yeah.
And that was just part of the great USC lore.
Well, one of the great stories about playing at Southern California is they always play Notre Dame. I admire those programs for doing that. We put this Notre Dame team number 21 on the list. It was a 1988 Lou Holtz best team. It climbed from number 13 in the opening polls to finish as the nation's only unbeaten team. The Fighting Irish, they outdueled top-ranked Miami 31-30. If you ask a lot of people from South Florida, Miami won that game too, depending on how the goal line looked on TV. But that famous, infamous Catholics versus convicts, and they stopped Miami on a 2-point conversion in the final minute and went on to win a national championship. But they also won the national championship later in the year when Lou Holtz said, no, they'd rather play West Virginia as opposed to a rematch. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, you think about Lou Holtz, Charlton, one of the great motivators in the history of college football.
Yeah.
He left the University of Arkansas, and he said his dream job was always to coach the Fighting Irish at Notre Dame. And he was able to go there and deliver a national championship. That was a tremendous team he had, led by quarterback Tony Rice, Charlton.
Yep.
And that game was one of the most memorable games in college football history, the University of Miami versus Notre Dame down in South Bend.
Yep.
A very controversial call at the goal line saying that Miami did not get in,
yeah.
Although 3 different camera angles showed otherwise. Notre Dame went on to win that national championship under Lou Holtz.
Yeah. Jesus, I've sinned against you. I think Notre Dame had that come to Jesus moment because Miami really won that game. Number 20, 1988 Tennessee Volunteers. The Vols followed up their SEC championship in 1997 with their first national championship in nearly half a century. The Vols beat 8 bowl teams that season, 4 ranked National League teams away from home. The Vols defense, think about this, 10 of its 13 opponents, they held them to less than 20 points. There were 26 players from that 1998 team that were selected by the NFL, including 9 of the 11 defensive starters. Big C, not only do they excel in moonshine, they excel in playing ball. Big C, your thoughts?
Philip Fulmer gets a lot of credit as the head coach of that team, Charlton. Everybody thought that Peyton Manning, while he was a quarterback at Tennessee as a 4-year starter, would go on and win a national championship.
That's right.
They waited until Peyton Manning left and T. Martin took over the helms at Tennessee to catapult to national prominence, Charlton, and win that national championship with an undefeated season. As you spoke about, a very dominant team, Charlton, added a lot of members to the NFL fraternity, and 9 of those 11 defensive starters, Charlton, drafted by the NFL in that season.
Yeah, amazing. Also in the SEC, a number 19 pick, 2010 Auburn Tigers. His college career might have been fleeting, but quarterback Cam Newton had one of the greatest seasons for a quarterback in the SEC history, on the way to winning the 2010 Heisman Trophy, leading the Auburn Tigers to a 14-0 record, and their first national championship since 1957. The great Cam Newton accounted for 4,370 yards of total offense and 50 touchdowns. The defense was led by defensive tackle Nick Fairley and the Lombardi Award winner as well. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, that Auburn team, Charlton, Cam Newton was a one-man wrecking crew. He was a man amongst boys that season at Auburn, a very magical season, Charlton, that led not only to the Heisman Trophy but a national championship. No one could stop Cam Newton, even when they got to that championship game, Charlton, against the Oregon Ducks.
Yeah.
He was the difference in that game to give Auburn that national championship.
Yeah, he was just a dominant player then. He's still a dominant player. 18th choice, the 2000 Oklahoma Sooners. They were not Bob Stoops' most talented team, but they proved to be one of the most hard-nosed teams of the past 20 years that the Sooners have ever had. Opening the season 19th in the poll, in October they obliterated number 11 Texas, knocked off number 2 Kansas State on the road, and hammered then number 1 Nebraska, and completed the national championship by dominating Florida State, a double-digit favorite in the Orange Bowl. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Bob Stoops was always named Big Game Bob, and they said he could never get over the hump, but he did in that one season, Charlton, when he won the national championship. And as you said, in his wake were nationally ranked teams.
Yeah.
And his team was able to rise to the occasion. They went out and handled business against Florida State in the Orange Bowl, Charlton, to complete that national championship run. But they came from obscurity to national champions. That is how you like to see college football played. An underdog winning it all.
Yeah, that's very true. And what we're going to do is come up on what's called a Big C timeout. We're going to take the timeout. We're going to talk some more football and some more things that are going on in this great country of ours. We hope that you'll take it with us, and we'll be right back in just a moment. All right, we are back from what's called the Big C pause, and we really appreciate the way that Big C Sports is prominent on the scene of the sports universe. I want to say that you can follow Big C Sports 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as we are part of artificial intelligence on the #1 podcast network in the universe, iHeartRadio podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. You can follow us on YouTube. You can follow us on Spreaker. If you have a TV set in your home, all you have to do is follow Xfinity Comcast. You'll follow Big C Sports. I really appreciate that. But still, my favorite one so far, if you have the app in your home called Alexa, you can say, Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast. You'll hear from our sponsors. You'll hear welcome to the show. I'll introduce Big C as the Mystic, and he'll do his thing. And I really appreciate all of our sponsors for their support. So, anytime you talk about football, I remember being in barbershops, just like you see now, Big C, whether it's TV or radio. Everybody's giving you their opinion about who the best teams are. But they don't talk about history the way we've done the last 2 days. And that's for you old-timers to go ahead and Google it and maybe live some moments when you were a youth and you saw some of the great teams play that never get talked about today. Big C, why is it so important to always bring in history and not just what happened in the past week? Big C, your thoughts?
I think the major part of that, Charlton, is to have an understanding of how the game has evolved, but it's also stayed the same. As we think we've seen the greatest players of all time in the past decade or so, Charlton, you have to go back and remember that football is a team sport.
Yeah.
And when we talk about some of the greatest teams of all time, Charlton, we're not talking about the guys you see on the highlight shows now. We're talking about what you do in depth for an entire season.
Yeah.
And when you talked about a team like the Yale Bulldogs, only giving up 4 points in an entire season over a 10-game stretch. I know they play more games on a season basis now, Charlton.
Yeah.
But you think about holding an opponent's 10 opponents to just 4 points.
Yep.
That's history in the making right there. And everyone who is watching television today, Charlton, and watching college football, 99.9% of those know nothing about that.
Yeah.
All the broadcasters on television have great research staffs, but they don't go back, Charlton, and tell you what was occurring in black and white when college football was being played. They might talk about 1 or 2 games, but they're not going to go in depth about the greatest games of all time. And I think anybody who's a sports aficionado,
yeah,
just like when we covered boxing a couple of weeks ago, everybody knows of the boxers of today. But no one knew about these boxers who had over 200 career fights, Charlton, and won 80% of them.
No.
So when you think about that, no one knew about Julio Cesar Chavez 87 consecutive wins.
That's right.
They think Floyd Mayweather has the record at 51. No, Julio Cesar Chavez had 87 consecutive wins to start his career. So when we look at these college football teams and we see teams pitching 6 shutouts over the course of a season, over a 10-game season, that's phenomenal. Teams giving up 28 points over the course of a season, giving up 25 points over the course of a season.
Yeah.
That's what people need to know and understand the greatness of college football over time.
You know, one of my favorite games, and again, I'm a biased guy, but the game they called the Bush Push at Notre Dame. Because when that game was happening, I was actually out at my daughter's soccer game, and I heard it on the radio just coming back, and all I heard was, "You won't believe the finish at South Bend." And I was like, oh my God, they lost. I mean, because usually we're hearing USC with another win, But this was time they announced, you won't believe the finish at South Bend. And it's what they call the Reggie Bush push. But there was a play, I think it was 4th down, and USC was back in their own territory. And Matt Leinart was a quarterback, and he threw out and hit a receiver. I can't remember the receiver's name. I think it's Dwayne Jarrett. And he ran down to about the 20-yard line. And from there, Matt Leinart ran out of bounds. The ball was knocked out of bounds, which could have been given to Notre Dame. But I think it went forward, so they called it USC's ball. But long story short, the Bush push, that helped USC go on to play for another national title. To me, that game had everything. Notre Dame had changed jerseys when they went in at halftime from blue to green, and the crowd went nuts. But I think I just want to get your thoughts on, would that game rank as one of the best of all time in your mind, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, it's up there. I mean, we had it on the list, Charlton, as one of the top games, but I don't even know if I can put it in the top 10 because, Charlton, there's some phenomenal games when you look at football. I understand that you're biased towards USC, but you got to look at some games that were even more harrowing. I mean, you think about that Miami Notre Dame game that we talked about, the Converts versus the Catholics.
Yeah.
Look how that game played out, Charlton. There's been some great bowl games over the eras that you looked at that were back and forth. I think one of the greatest games of all time to me was BYU and SMU down in the Holiday Bowl in San Diego back in the 70s.
Yeah.
When this game went back and forth, we saw over 1,100 yards in total offense in this game, Charlton. You can look through the pages of college football and see some of the greatest games ever. But if they're not a nationally ranked team, a lot of people don't realize how great these games were because they weren't broadcast on national television.
Well, here's a game that might, and I am West Coast biased, just like this SEC media is biased, Big C. I know we have that West Coast South thing going on, but I'm going to say Alabama 1978. They were preseason number 1. I know you recall this. Preseason number 1. They entered the de facto national championship game ranked number 2. They were attempting to take down number 1 Penn State, and they did so by winning a 14-7 game thanks to a famous fourth-quarter goal line stand, and that preserved the lead for Alabama. They went 11-1 and went on to win the national championship. Something that's happened in the last 30-plus years is a lot of the northern teams back then, they were considered slow teams, like 3 yards in a cloud of dust teams. The SEC has always had a lot of speed, but it was that team from up north that had just as much speed as Alabama had, even though Alabama prevailed. And I think they had, what they call it, Southern cooking, Big C, your thoughts?
Well, that game was played down in New Orleans in the Sugar Bowl. They played Penn State. Barry Krause was the linebacker who came over the top and stopped Matt Suhey, the running back for Penn State, and preserved the game win for Alabama. But, I mean, that just goes, I mean, when you start turning the pages of the greatest games in college football, and we're going to have to do a show on that, of the greatest games in college football and see where they all rank. But, I mean, you go back to a game, think about Michigan and Appalachian State. You want to talk about a great game. But you had a Division I AA team go into the Big House and defeat Michigan on their home turf on a blocked field goal that was returned for a touchdown.
Amazing.
That was Brady Hoke's downfall at Michigan when that happened, Charlton. But you think about, you can turn page after page over the history of college football, even if you're only looking within the last 25 years. If you take the last 25 years and take the 25 greatest games in college football during that span, Charlton, and like I said, we're going to have to do a show real soon on that. And you'll be marveled at some of the games that you're not even thinking about and say, wow, that game was tremendous.
I know.
I mean, you talk about USC and Notre Dame in that game. Remember that same season, Fresno State took USC to task on that season.
In the Coliseum.
So you have to question how dominant of a team USC really was when Fresno State took them to a touchdown, in a high-scoring affair. And I think Fresno State might have put about 49 points on the board against USC.
I think it was 50-42, but USC trailed that game in about the last 4 minutes. And then the Southern California referees, they made sure that USC went to the national championship game. I remember that game very well, Big C. A lot of kids in Fresno, they grew up in Southern California, so oftentimes there's added incentive to play. But I love it, whether it's Doug Flutie, Miami and Boston College. I would love to get Big C's thoughts on how some of those games have transpired over the years. I want to just touch on a few more things before we close out the day in the second half. And I'd go, listen, everybody has a right to their opinion. It doesn't matter. But it's a pretty sad dog that won't wag his own tail. And I know that there are times when you can say things before they happen, not after, but before they happen, and they come true. They call that being prescient. It's called having knowledge of things before they happen. Now, Jimmy Garoppolo, he's the 49ers' great white hope, or the great white hype. Now, here's a kid that went to Denver last night. Now, keep in mind, as they're making excuses for him in the Bay Area, I still think about this great organization that's had guys like Jerry Rice. It's had guys like Joe Montana. It's had so many great players, Big C, from Roger Craig, Tom Rathman, Brent Jones. I mean, so the great late Dwight Clark, it had them all, Big C. But I got to be honest, because we run the risk of being idiots if we say things and they don't come true. But unlike mainstream media, I want to pat ourselves on the back when they do come true, and I want everybody to do well. But the 49ers played Denver Monday night. Garoppolo, $137 million contract. This is the guy that they couldn't wait to get. And they were saying the reason Colin Kaepernick is not able to play in the NFL is because he's not talented. In the same 49er uniform, his last 8 games, Google it, he was 16 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions. Garoppolo has thrown 5 picks in practice, and people say, practice? You talk about practice? Well, in the game last night at Denver, he was 1 of 6, 1 interception, could have been 2. And you think about this. Why is he getting so much love when the last quarterback took him to the Super Bowl? If he had thrown 1 interception, completed 1 pass in 6, yeah, I can see don't give him a chance. But Big C, it's opposite. How does that make any sense? Your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, the situation in San Francisco is that they're going to say he's been rusty, that he hasn't had any live action in 11 months on the football field. So he had to be a little skittish. But here's a guy, as you say, you've given $137 million to.
Yep.
You've labeled him as a franchise NFL quarterback, that he is going to deliver San Francisco once again back to the promised land. I've always thought that there was a long road for Jimmy Garoppolo, even when San Francisco made the trade for him 3 years ago, is that he didn't deliver right away. They didn't play him until the last 5 games of the season, and they wanted to play him against the weaker opponents on the schedule, teams that were out of the playoffs also, and playing a lot of backup players.
Yeah.
When Jimmy Garoppolo started off the season last year with the 49ers, we saw where immediately he ended up with a knee injury against Kansas City, Charlton, I believe it was.
Yeah, it was.
That he was lost for the season. And now coming back, I mean, when I think about what Nick Mullins has done in San Francisco last year when he took over for C.J. Beathard at quarterback, and then even in the preseason games that they've had this year, Charlton, how well he's performed. But he's not going to get the starting nod because of the contract of
Garoppolo?
Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah.
But the 49ers have put all their eggs in one basket. Regardless of how he's performing, if he does not live up to the hype, there will be excuses that the team is not performing around him, that he's going to need better weapons and better tools.
Yeah.
We saw the development of the 49ers offense under Nick Mullins, a free agent, undrafted player last year at quarterback.
That's right.
Kerry Kittles, the tight end, all-pro tight end, led tight ends in yards and receptions last year, Charlton.
Yeah.
So the 49ers have the pieces in place. They have 2 excellent young running backs and an outstanding young offensive line. If the 49ers can't get above 500 this year, Charlton, all of it has to fall on the shoulders of Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah.
And then the media needs to find a new excuse why they haven't had success.
Well, you know, the thing that I detest is because we know the thing with the Kaepernick, it was about race. People talk about Jay-Z now, and Jay-Z buying into the NFL, and he has his own background issues. But people try to say, oh, it's not about race, he just can't play. 16 touchdowns, 4 interceptions in his last 8 games on a bad team. And you can Google that. Big C Sports has told you that. And I want everyone to succeed. But what I don't like happening, Big C, is what I've seen for many, many moons. I've seen many times, and I know maybe you have seen it down south, I don't know. Because it's personal. And there are times when black men have been told you got to work twice as hard, you got to be twice as good, and even then you may not get a fair shake. And when you can see it in the public eye, it's just ironic how the God does things. In fact, what just happened is ironic how the universe will bring things together. You have Kaepernick issue now is with the Jay-Z, but the NFL is on the side of Jay-Z. And then they were always anti-Kaepernick. But this quarterback that was brought in to be the prodigal son of San Francisco, On his numbers alone, he's not even a 500 quarterback. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, the thing with Jimmy Garoppolo, Charlton, is that we know that Colin Kaepernick is not going to play in the NFL again.
Yeah.
They've already banished him from the league. They just never made it public. But it's the unwritten rule of the collusion that the owners have is that nobody's going to sign him.
Yeah.
Plus, they gave him a settlement during the offseason, Charlton, to guarantee that nobody will sign him.
Right.
The scenario with Jimmy Garoppolo is, Charlton, is that they want all white quarterbacks to succeed, regardless of whether they're talented or not.
Yeah.
They're going to say, okay, Bill Belichick took a chance on the guy. He drafted him in the second round. And if you look around the NFL and you see the quarterbacks that have been scattered throughout the NFL that Bill Belichick has drafted, only one has succeeded. That's Tom Brady.
Yeah.
He is the only quarterback that has succeeded in the NFL that Bill Belichick has drafted. You go back and look. Bill Belichick has drafted 8 quarterbacks since he's had Tom Brady.
Yeah.
They've all been on that roster. All of them have a Super Bowl ring.
Yeah.
So Tom Brady is the only one to pull the triggers in a Super Bowl. So just because Bill Belichick drafts you does not make you a star in the NFL. It makes you a star within his system.
And
that's the reason why he got rid of Jimmy Garoppolo. He saw something that he did not want in Jimmy Garoppolo. That's why he was willing to dump him off to the San Francisco 49ers for some draft picks, Charlton.
Yeah, and he's smart. But even Belichick, he was not the genius at Cleveland that he is in New England. I think the one common denominator is Tom Brady. Now, I just want to tie things in because the universe lined it up today. Sometimes it's just called a poetic moment. So, and again, everybody has their own opinion. I'm not trying to please anybody. I just want you to Google what we say. Now, the NFL, only in America. Who said that? Don King, the guy with the big afro? Only in America. The NFL has joined in partnership with a man who once said that he was a notorious drug dealer. That's Jay-Z. And yet the NFL still bans players for using illegal drugs. And sometimes it's just a habit. I told you the story in Northern California driving today. I was going to give some Girl Scout cookies to some homeless people. They just happen to be Caucasian. I didn't think they didn't take the cookies because I'm an African-American man. If you're starving, you probably eat out of the garbage can. But they said no to the cookies, but probably they would have said yes to something else. But juxtapose the NFL, Big C, kicking people out of the league for having a substance abuse problem, but now they're patting themselves on the back because they're joined with the Jay-Z, and it can be good and nefarious. It tells white America and black America, look, we got the best black guy we could to speak for you guys. And he used to do an illicit activity that sends most black men to the criminal justice system. Big C, your thoughts?
As this move more and more with Jay-Z and Roger Goodell and the NFL, I found it to be ultra hypocritical, Charlton.
Yeah.
Is that the NFL is still banning players, suspending players for drug use. Josh Gordon just got reinstated by the NFL back to the New England Patriots, and I was thinking about that. I said, did they reinstate him because they've gone into partnership with a former notorious drug dealer?
What a coincidence. What a coincidence.
And everybody knows of Jay-Z's past. Jay-Z even bragged about his past in some of his music lyrics.
Yep.
But the NFL has embraced this, Charlton. They brought a guy in. So, I mean, the NFL has crossed barriers that they've never crossed before.
Yeah.
But to do this, Charlton, I mean, you have to talk about backgrounds of players.
Yep.
The NFL is always being real stern right now, Charlton, is about the shield, protecting the shield. And I wonder, will the NFL put that on the shield, that we've gone in partnership with a former drug dealer?
Yeah.
Even though Jay-Z has turned around his life, but there's always a past with everybody, Charlton.
Yeah.
And now he's going to be part of the representation of the logo, and Jay-Z's history has to come into play that way. When we talk about guys and they'll go back and say, okay, this guy has a history of spousal abuse.
Yes.
And so we're going to punish him for this, not because of what he did today. We're going to suspend him for an action he took last year.
Yeah.
Against a female.
Yeah.
Now, you got to think about it. When you're peddling drugs, Charlton, everybody's affected, males and female and children.
The communities.
Jay-Z was part of that. That was his lifestyle.
Yeah.
Even though he's one of the biggest music moguls in the world today, Charlton, and a billionaire.
Yeah.
But all of those things, when the NFL is talking about protecting the shield, how can Roger Goodell suspend a player from here on in saying, okay, this is for what you did last week or last year because you failed the drug test 4 months ago. You're going to be suspended for 4 games. Or you failed the drug test last season, so now you're going to be suspended for 4 games this season. But I'm sitting in the corporate office of the NFL headquarters with a guy who probably sold drugs to somebody that you know.
Isn't that something? And it's real talk, and you're not going to hear this on any other program in the universe, but you can Google it. I'm about educating people, even myself. So if you've ever been in some communities, and being here, being around Oakland and Los Angeles and San Francisco growing up and in many, many different towns, I saw the leftovers of men that peddled dope. I saw where grandparents didn't want to walk down the street 3 blocks to the grocery store to get milk. I saw where a lot of kids that I thought were going to make it, some drug addict or some drug dealer got them on drugs. And now they destroyed their lives. And I know that sometimes people go into the church and they atone. I know some pastors used to be drug dealers also. Some politicians too. I'm not being holier than thou, but it's real. So if anyone in America can tell me what person is not in prison because of what they did in the past, everybody in jail is in jail because of what they did in the past. And of course, anyone can make it. They can atone for their sins. Everybody can. But the cynical side of me says, because people can Google now, what credibility does the black community have? And we're not a monolithic group because there's some white guys doing some dirt now that are still owning teams. But what credibility do you have when you say to these young kids out there in the street that you want to go help? You can become a drug dealer when you're young. Just change your ways when you get old and we'll make you part of the NFL. That's a bad signal, Big C. Your thoughts?
It is. And, I really wonder what Roger Goodell was thinking in the totality of this decision. I'm not against Jay-Z's advancement in society. I'm not against having a black man at the table in the NFL because that's the only way that your thing is going to advance as far as from a social structure, Charlton, is having a black person at the corporate table in the NFL. But when it comes at that cost, Charlton, that you're still suspending black players because they're using illegal substance, and one of the kingpins that were distributing that illegal substance now is at the board of directors in the NFL, how should that weigh across with the players when you say, okay, you're going to be suspended because you tested positive for a banned substance.
Right.
But yet I got a guy sitting across the table from me that was selling those banned substances.
Yeah, and that's the truth. You can't find, I'm not bragging, it's just a fact. I've never used an illegal drug in my life. Now, that takes a brave man to say that, but it's true. And anybody who chooses me knows that. They know me, they know that. That doesn't make me any better person than some former drug dealer. But the point is, when young black kids are being told to do everything right, study your grades, go to school, get a good education, don't just be a dumb jock, make sure you learn something. But when they look at and see, you know how tough it's been for black men to get to the top of the table in the NFL, but I think it's a silent message that they're sending to black people also. You can still sell your drugs, you can still do all the stuff as long as you get rich and famous, we'll accept you. And that's a message that has to stop, Big C. I'm not against Jay-Z and anybody who succeeds. He who was without sin to cast the first stone, nobody would throw stones, Big C. But I know they have other examples. And I want to bring this up for people jumping on the Jay-Z thing, including myself. No one even talks about Bob Kraft anymore, the owner of the New England Patriots, who was arrested for trafficking. He was dealing with women who were being trafficked. So is trafficking women less nefarious than trafficking drugs? Both men have done different things. They're both hurtful, but it hasn't stopped them, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, I guess that also helped Jay-Z be accepted into the circle, Charlton, is that you had Robert Kraft, who was arrested in Jupiter, Florida for solicitation of trafficking, prostitution, Charlton.
Yeah.
And it's gone away. That case is going to be thrown out. We won't hear anything else about it.
Yeah,
Robert Kraft is a model citizen as far as the NFL eyes go.
Yeah.
So, but you get players like Kareem Hunt, who suspended the first half of the season for an altercation that he had with a woman in Cleveland 2 years ago, Charlton.
Yeah.
And he lied about it. So I guess when you look at an active NFL player, if they do something that's egregious, then it's a suspendable offense. I think about Robert Irsay. So I guess it really comes into play with Jay-Z. Robert Irsay was caught trafficking OxyContin, the owner of the Indianapolis Colts 4 years ago.
Yeah.
$25,000 worth of OxyContin in the passenger seat of his car.
Yeah.
And he didn't have a prescription for it, Charles. He did not have a prescription for it. So I guess it's modus operandi for the NFL now that you can have an owner who's trafficking narcotics.
Yeah.
Robert Irsay of the Indianapolis Colts.
Google it.
And then you bring in Jay-Z, who had been known drug dealer, as he said, of illicit drugs, Charlton. And that's what propelled his career to get him to the heights of where he is. So I guess when you're sitting at the table, Jim Irsay will know where to get his fix from, Jay-Z.
Well, I'm telling you, in this real talk, and people can Google it. Because I got to tell you, I grew up and I saw pimps, and I saw drug dealers, I saw preachers, and people that went and did decent jobs. But one of the things my parents always told me is don't be one of them. I knew guys that were part of Bloods and Crips. I knew guys that did that garbage. Most of them were murdered or sent to prison. That's just a fact. None of them, I don't think any of them had a retirement plan unless they got out of that business. And that's just real talk. And I know Jay-Z would tell his own kids don't do that. But that's one thing. I got to bring this up too because it's important to me, Big C. There's some Jeffrey Epstein. He's Donald Trump's friend, one of his friends before he hanged himself, allegedly.
One of his best friends.
One of his best friends. And people can Google this too because Big C Sports is real. This man was such a pedophile that he was ordering 12-year-old girls for a birthday party for himself. They just happened to be women who were considered minority, and POTUS still hung up with him. So people say, oh, you guys are being tough on Jay-Z, or you guys are being anti-drug dealers. I don't want any drug dealer around me. And I know there are many of them in the professional business, whether it's real estate or mortgages or insurance. I know that for a fact. I've seen it with my own eyes. But they're white, they wear a suit and tie. Nobody assumes they're doing anything wrong. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, it's a black eye on society. I mean, it has to be called out. I mean, we've never had a president call for an investigation of a pedophile killing himself in jail. You think about that.
Nope.
But it was one of his best friends, so he wants to have an investigation on that. He didn't call for an investigation of the young women that were being manipulated and extorted.
No.
The president didn't call for an investigation of that. He just kept saying Epstein was a good man. And he was one of his best friends. They both liked young women, and just Epstein liked them younger.
Yeah.
That lets you know the sickness of the administration that we have. But as we look at society now, Charlton, society, sports, and politics, everything is on a slippery slope. It seems the more denigrating you get, the more you advance in society, the more prominence you have.
Yeah.
And that's a terrible thing. Is we're always talking about you want to have athletes as role models.
No, you don't.
You want to have politicians as role models.
No, you don't.
And think about that, Charlton. Now that the NFL is suspending players because they say that they're using illegal substance, you go into partnership with a guy who was selling illegal substance, and you say that's the new representation of the Shield.
Well, everybody has a background. The Kennedy family, they were known as bootleggers, and they become presidents and part of our most powerful positions in the United States of America. But they have a white face on it, so nobody looks at it twice. But the thing I'm not anti-Jay-Z. I know he hangs out with Warren Buffett. But and a lot of Roger Goodell now. But I know they live in communities that frown on people that look like Jay-Z. That's a fact. Money does change things. It changes how people look at you. Big C, you've always talked about that. But what our society does is they'll pigeonhole a black guy, and they'll let the white guys do it with immunity. They don't get judged. They don't get racially profiled. They don't get looked at. There's no drugs coming into this country without some white men in powerful positions knowing where it's coming from. And I believe that with all my heart. It's not climbing over a wall, crossing the Rio Grande. And that's real talk. So whether it's sports or politics, that's why we bring it all to you on Big C Sports. Last thing I want to cover on this subject, Big C. In Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, authorities in the Dominican Republic, they have arrested former Major League Baseball pitcher Octavio Dotel and cited him and ex-infielder Luis Castillo for their alleged links to a drug trafficking and money laundering ring. Officials said that Tuesday. Didn't we just tell you what Jay-Z, in his own words, said he used to do? Now you got guys getting arrested for being allegedly. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, the allegedness always goes a long way. I remember former Cowboy Nate Newton, who was arrested for having 200 pounds of marijuana in a van going through South Texas, Charlton.
Wow.
And he spent some time in prison. But I guess it's who you're rubbing shoulders with and who you're selling it with, Charlton, that whether you're going to get convicted and spend time or whether you're going to walk. But, you know, you talk about the two baseball players down in the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
The NFL embraced one of its owners, Mr. Irsay from Indianapolis, Charlton.
Yeah.
Who had $25,000 of illegal Oxycontin. Let an NFL player have $25,000 worth of Oxycontin in his car, Charlton.
Yep.
Be intoxicated at the time that he's arrested by the police and see if he still has an NFL career.
No.
So there's a two-tier standard on how the NFL hands out its discipline. The owners can be caught in a sexual rage scheme dealing with minors, Charlton. An owner can be caught with $25,000 worth of Oxycontin and intoxicated, cannot pass a drug test. And those things are okay.
Yeah.
But you let a player get caught in those type of things. Lawrence Taylor is registered as a sex offender, Charlton.
Yeah.
For dealing with that.
Yeah.
Same thing Robert Kraft getting off on. Lawrence Taylor is now a registered sex offender, one of the greatest defensive players in the history of the NFL, for doing the same thing that Robert Kraft did down in Jupiter, Florida. Lawrence Taylor is a registered sex offender for life. There are players banished from the NFL for life for using the same narcotic that Colts owner Mr. Irsay used, Charlton.
Yeah.
And they didn't have $25,000 worth of it, and they were not intoxicated at the time they were caught. But they failed the drug test, and the NFL banned them for life.
Yeah.
Mr. Irsay is still part of that fraternity, Charlton, for doing the same thing that the players get banished for.
I guess he passed what's called the paperback test. You know, whether it's prop betting, that's about, in order to have a prop bet, you got to bet on odds, and there are TV shows about it. We talked about that before, but it's almost encouraging guys on the inside to do something to make the prop pay off. They're not going to advertise it. I still wonder, why was that Nate Diaz and Anthony Pettis fight in Anaheim as opposed to Las Vegas? When did Las Vegas stop liking money, Big C? And it's amazing that the two underdogs won that fight. You don't think prop betting is real, Big C? You hear about stuff like that on Big C Sports, and that's why I say Big C Sports, you can hear us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on the #1 podcast network in the universe on iHeartRadio Podcast. You can follow Big C Sports on Apple Podcasts. You can follow Big C Sports on Google Podcasts. In fact, you can say, Google, play Big C Sports Podcast, and it will flash up on the page on the iHeartRadio Podcast. It's amazing. You can also follow us on Xfinity Comcast on television. I still love the app by Alexa. If you say, Alexa, play Big C Sports Podcast, you'll hear from our sponsors. You'll hear welcome to the show, and then I'll introduce Big C as the mystic, and he'll do his thing. And so I just appreciate the growth of Big C Sports and where we're going. I want to close out, Big C, on this. I want to get you this thought, and it's in my gut. Man, we could talk so much about so many things, but I know we only have limited time. Why did Jimmy the Greek Snyder and NFL and CBS stop this segment with Irv Cross, Brett Musburger, Jane Kennedy on betting? We're seeing some of that now, Big C, but 30 seconds or less, your thoughts?
Well, the reason why CBS pulled that segment from the morning show on the NFL, Charlton, is because some racial overtones that Jimmy the Greek Snyder used at that time, commenting on some NFL African-American wide receivers about how they were built genetically, Charlton, to play the game and where they came from with these animal genetic traits.
Yeah.
That's the reason why Jimmy the Greek Snyder was pulled off of television, because he used racial epithets toward African Americans in the NFL.
Wow. Big C, I know you got to run, and I always will say, back in the day, there was a man by the name of Drew Boudini Brown. He was known as Muhammad Ali's right-hand man, and he would always tell Ali, with all you got to use, how can you lose? Rumble, young man, rumble. Big C, tell me what's going on in your mind in the sports universe.
Well, Charlton, I'm getting ready to go marinate some meat for the next couple of days, because on Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, we got a kickoff of college football down in Orlando, Florida. The University of Florida versus the University of Miami.
Yes.
In the opening game of the 150th season of college football.
Well, I'm telling you, I would like to see it kicked off too, and you can kick it off too every Monday through Friday at 5 and 6 p.m. worldwide when you follow Big C Sports. on the Big C Sports Network, on the #1 network in the United States of America. And Big C Sports has been voted the #1 sports show in the universe, according to Big C. And them good old boys down south, as we always tell you, there's never, ever an excuse for domestic violence. If you know any man or woman going through that garbage, please pick up the phone and call 911, because no man or woman should ever have to go through that garbage on their own. And as we always tell you on every Big C Sports show, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we hope that you have a super fantastic day.